think we should be ready to go. Had some last minute operations to prepare for. Had to prepare myself some tea and some coffee because sometimes you can't decide which of the beverages you're going to partake of in your stream. And we seem to be going well here as far as I can see. Now, welcome to the stream. Apologies that there wasn't a stream last week because I was quite ill. Mostly, I sounded kind of like that little possessed girl in the Exorcist movie. If you watched last week's video or sorry, this week's video and last week's video, then you'll know my voice was sort of, it was sort of on the way out in the week before, and it was pretty much on the way back in this most recent video on the arithmetic command. So getting better. I should say that I'm going to apologize in advance. There's a potential that I might let a cough out without muting the microphone. Until I sort of get rolling on talking, I tend to have a little bit of a, a frog in the old throat there. But since I wasn't entirely sure how I was going to be feeling, I never really came up with too much of what we might actually do in tonight's stream because I wasn't sure until sometime late yesterday evening and into early today that I was on the mend and probably going to be able to do a stream. And due to that whole coughing thing, it might not be as long a stream as a normal one. We'll just have to play that by ear and see what happens. Should say I got a little bit of new gear, which you might have noticed. I'm still playing with in the videos on the other channel there. A little bit of lighting, so I have more lights. One up there, which I think lights me a little bit better than has been the case in the past. We'll see what happens with that. And remember, if you're new to the live stream, then feel free if you have any questions about what I'm doing or anything at all about plugin or package development in Sublime Text, you can hop into the chat and say hello and ask your question. Don't worry if you might be interrupting or anything along those lines. We are here to share the knowledge of plugin and package development and field questions where possible. If I know an answer, I will give you one. And if I don't have an answer, I'll probably say something clever like, I don't know. But maybe we can find one out and play with stuff and see what happens. Should also point out, it goes without saying, I suppose, down in the description of this video and all of the live streams is a link to my regular YouTube channel where I do videos once a week, appearing every Monday with the various tutorials in Sublime Text covering a variety of topics. And starting in April, videos are going to start being interspersed into the regular rotation on getting started with plugin and package development, talking about a lot of those core terms that a lot of package developers take for granted. If you've ever hung out in the Discord and asked a question and someone will say view this, window that, sheet the other, and things along those lines, and you don't know what any of those things are or what regions or selections are and things like that, those are all topics that we're going to be covering in a series of videos. I'm expecting at this point that all those videos will probably be roughly 30 minutes in length. And hang on a second here. That one really wanted to get out. Okay, so that is the plan going forward for that. And I'm thinking the current plan is to alternate weeks between regular Sublime tutorial videos and plugin tutorial videos. And if I can find enough free time to start getting ahead on the video backlog, which I normally try to have a couple ready to go, but for the last month or so, I've had a hard time finding the time to get that many videos done all in one because of various, real life things getting in the way of me playing with Sublime Text. Maybe I'll even be able to have 2 videos a week on the channel for a period of time. Anyway, we'll go ahead and see what happens. That's enough of me nattering here. I should also point out I am showcasing, if you are a member of the Sublime Text Discord, you may have seen this sample image here, I have created my own Sublime Text t-shirt. Well, I mean, if you watch videos on the other channel, you know that is in fact the case. This is just one with my profile head. I'll look down here. Profile head, orbiting the planet of Sublime Text because Sublime makes the world go round. And with that, I guess I should probably do something like this and say, let's go ahead and get the old live stream started. Should also point out that after watching the playback of last week's video, one of the things I was thinking when I was ill and I wasn't sure if I was going to be able to get that arithmetic video done because I had recorded some of the stuff, and then I had to go back and re-record some parts of it, and then I ended up with a really long video. I was thinking one of my plans was maybe I could pluck some samples out of one of the live streams and use that on the other channel. And while I was perusing, trying to decide if there was what clips I might use for something like that, I realized that down in this area, I was blocking up the console input widget while I was busy, talking about stuff. So a lot of the stuff I was typing was going behind my big fat head in the window around me here. So I've resolved that issue now, I think. Now the only problem is if I was to use the find panel, you can't see the buttons on the right hand side. But, we can only do so much, and similar for that one. What can we say? So let's see. I did have a couple of ideas. Now, one of the things that was sort of floated as a potential plug-in idea in the Discord was the idea of color schemes, and this isn't specific to just color schemes. Have the notion of pop-up CSS. So there's CSS that can appear inside of the global section to specify the global styles for things like pop-up windows, name being what it is. But it's kind of a bummer to write CSS that way because it has to be one long string, but at least it is syntax highlighted now. And we thought, what if there was a plugin that let you grab that content out of the string and it shot it over into a temporary tab where you could edit it with syntax highlighting and all of that jazz. And then every time you save in that file, it would go back and re-update the content of the string over in the other file. And that seemed like a neat idea, so that might be something that we could play with tonight. There's also the idea, if you recall, a few streams back now, one of the things we were working on is the session cleaning script. We were enhancing it to be able to clean out not just old projects that no longer exist, but also folders and files from the recently accessed folders and files list that no longer exist at the request of someone who wanted to use it. And after all of that was done, we discovered that, in fact, what he actually wanted was a workspace cleaner and not a session cleaner, which unfortunately isn't something that script can do. But the thought did occur that since we now have the ability to know when there's a workspace in play in a particular window, we could perhaps create a plugin that detects that and then closes the project in the window, cleans the workspace, and then reopens the project again, or the workspace, if you will. That might be an idea of something to play with too. But just before the stream started, there was a question that someone was asking. I believe the name was Slalom in the Discord, and I think they're trying to work on some sort of, I don't want to say linting tool, but like I say, a code formatting tool or something along those lines that will modify the content of a buffer. And Slalom, and apologies if I'm misremembering that now, wanted to get a little bit of help, and I recommended maybe hopping into the live stream, but he lives in Portugal, or she lives in Portugal, they live in Portugal, and it's like 3 o'clock in the morning there. So I thought, based on the question, we might do just a little bit of an exploration in how you could create a command that will modify this content of a buffer in place in some particular fashion. So, and in excuse me, in the nature of trying to do that, say as explanatorily as possible, which is not something that generally happens here in the live stream. Apologies for that. Where I tend to just sort of do stuff like say new plugin, like so. Maybe I might even type that correctly. My keyboard layout's all funky. Let's go ahead and do it this way. So let's say we want to create a plugin that could take the content of some file of a particular type, grab the whole thing out, and then do some sort of work on it, a line at a time, and put the results back into the current file or into a new file. So the way we're going to do that is we're going to go up to the Tools menu and we're going to choose Developer New Plugin, like so, which is the same thing as me doing New Plugin here because I added this to my command palette. Now we have this stub plugin here, and I'm going to go ahead and save this. It's going to default to my user package, and we're going to call it, say, File Rewriter, just so that it is something specific. Now, the name doesn't matter, only the extension matters. It has to be in a package. This is going to put it in your abuser package, and it should be in the root of the package because only Python files in the root of a package are considered plugins. All the other Python files are considered Python files. You have to do importing of those things manually in your plugin. That's more of an advanced topic. Now, if we're going to run this thing, hello, Ashwin. Welcome to the stream. Oh. You may or may not have missed my pre-apology. I'm still a little bit coughy. Sometimes they catch me unawares and a cough slips out before I have a chance to catch it or mute myself. We're just going over a question that Slalom was asking in the Discord here. Now we're going to assume, based on what was previously asked by this user, that they want to do this in a command. And we're going to do this in a text command because only text commands get the edit parameter that will allow us to actually modify the content of a file. So now our command is named example command. We'll go ahead and name this, let's say, file rewrite command, like so. And save that. And we're also going to go into the, well, we'll do this way. Key bindings file, which for some reason has opened on the wrong monitor. And super T, yeah, there we go. I was doing an example of something to help someone on the forum, the guy that was having the macro problem, as a matter of fact. And what did I call that thing? I already forget. Yeah. File rewrite. Rewrite. Now I can push this key and trigger that command. I'll even spell that correctly, shall I? So if we were to add, push that key, hello world is injected into the top of the buffer. So this command is totally working. Now, the other thing we're going to do here is immediately do an is enabled. Enable. Oh, good grief. Hang on. Let me scooch myself up. Incidentally, Ashwin, good work on that plugin example that you did in the Stack Overflow. That was pretty much exactly what I would have done in that particular case as well. Yeah, I've been a little bit croaky, but otherwise I'm feeling okay. I can breathe okay. I think I have a little bit of chest congestion still, not a lot. It's not keeping me awake like it has been, so that's good. But yeah, every now and then while I'm talking, a cough just sort of comes out. But I felt sort of bad. I think the Terminus video would have come out a little bit better, but I pre-recorded some stuff, and when I got to the part, I don't know if you remember, if you were in the Discord or you saw the conversation between me and Randy, there was that bug in Terminus. Actually, I think it's a bug in that WinPTY or PyWinPTI package where shell command doesn't work under Windows if you double quote various files because it does something funky with the thing. I had a bunch of that stuff all written. I had pre-tested everything in Linux and everything worked great. And then I recorded all the different bits. And when it got to the example part, it completely fell apart. And I'd spent a bunch of time investigating. I actually recorded some video pointing out that there was a bug in the thing and this is how you work around it. And then I didn't like that and I threw it all away. And that's why I recorded it, assuming it would work because I knew that Randy was going to have a fix for it. But what can you do? I've been having trouble trying to stay ahead of video production as of late. Now here in our file rewrite command, we're going to have this is enabled here because we're going to say we want this to only be enabled in a certain type of file. And the way we're going to do that is we're going to say self view match selector at 0.0 with, let's say, source.python, like this. I'm going to go ahead and do that and scoot that over so that we can actually look at this thing. What's this actually doing? Well, again, because we're trying to be more tutorially in this particular segment than we sometimes are on the channel, the isEnabled method is something that will be invoked on your command if Sublime wants to know if your command should be enabled right now. This should return a true or false. If it returns false, the command is not enabled. Key bindings won't work. The command won't appear in the command palette if you've added it there, and if you've added it to a menu, it'll appear visibly gray. Now, match selector is something that allows us to match the selector at a given point in the file to see if it matches that scope selector or not. So here we're testing to see if the position 0 matches source.python. And the idea here is because this is supposed to be based on a specific type of file, then the base scope throughout the entire file is always going to be the same. So you can just use 0.0 and that will reference the entire file. And you can figure out what the base scope for any particular file type is by opening a file of that type and going into the tools, I'll go this way, developer, show scope name, which has this particular key binding here on Linux, Control-Alt-Shift-P, and that's going to pop up source.python, and that's how I came up with that. Now, depending on where you invoke this in the file, you'll see various different things because this is how syntax highlighting and various other things work in Sublime. But the very first line is always the one that represents the type of the file. It's always source dot followed by something if it's a source file, and text dot followed by something if it's a text file. So here we're saying we want this to only be enabled in a Python file. So because this is a Python file, when I press the key bound to this, hello world appears up there in the corner. But if I just had a regular text file, this key no longer does anything because it's binding itself and stopping itself from happening here. Now, what we wanted to have happen here is we wanted to be able to grab the entire content of a file and modify it in some way. And you would gather the content of a file by using the substr method on a view, because a view represents a file, and because this is a text command, we have a view associated with our command. So self.view represents the file that this is currently active inside of, and substr is going to grab the content of some part of it. Indeed, I was thinking that very thing. The comment there is parts of this live stream can actually serve as supplementary material for your new package dev series. I was thinking that, and I'm trying to do a bit more tutorially type stuff in these so that if I do get sick and I can't make a video, I can pluck some content out and use it as a best of hits, clip show kind of operation. I'm going to do this. We can see that view substr takes the content of whatever region you give it and returns it back as a string. And you can create a region by using sublime.region, which of course is a class in the Sublime module that represents an area of the buffer. You provide it a beginning and an end, which is A and B. Those are character positions inside of the file. So this is position 0, this is position 1, this is position 2, and so on. And that's how you span a region of text. And here we want to say that this region spans the first character in the file all the way into the last character in the file, which is the length of this thing, because it is a character-based count, even if you're using Unicode where characters are sometimes 2 bytes instead of 1. Positions are always referenced based on characters. And we could say len self.view. There's another way to do that too. You can use view.size. If you want to do this, this returns the number of characters in the file. So that's another way to do this. You could say self.view.size instead of the length of self.view, whichever one of those you find cooler. So this is going to grab the content of this particular file, and we want to put that into a variable. So we'll say content equals like so. And just for our purposes, I'm going to go ahead and print the content. Now when I press the key, when this file has the focus, we see down there in the console, it's grabbed the entire content of this thing. It's all one string. So now we have the content of this particular file. Now I believe Slalom mentioned that he wanted to do something modifying the file on a line-by-line basis. So for that, you would say for line in content dot split slash n is probably one way to do that. And we could say print line. And if I hit the key, you end up with what looks to be the exact same output, but now it's printing it one line at a time. And if we were to say something like this, then we could see that in fact it's now printing this thing one line at a time. So if you want to do something one line at a time, this is a way to do that. Now he wants to do some sort of manipulation on this particular thing. So what we could do here is say result is going to be an empty list. And we're going to append into the result, let's say, the current line as is. And then down here we can say print result. The idea being we're going to iterate through this file content one line at a time, do something with it. We're not going to have that space in there. That's not going to work. This is going to be do something, and then we append the results in, and when we're done, we end up with theoretically a list of all of the modified content in the file, right? And we can see that here. So here's the first line, here's the second line. Right now, we're not doing anything with this, but what we could probably do is something like reverse, like so. I think that's a thing. And no, shoot. I know there's a way to do a thing like that. I should have looked up that, if all else being equal. Is there not a cool way to reverse a string that's just built in? Array reverse? Huh. Oh, actually, is it a built-in function? I was actually just thinking probably could use that weird reverse slice operator thing. Let's see. You know how we always have to remember how this stuff works? Yeah, there we go. Let's say we want to actually reverse the content of this file. And one of the nice things about the Sublime console is your ability to hop in there and test things out before you get going. So we're going to say colon -1. That's going to append a reversed content. So now every line in the file is in here, but it's backwards. Import Sublime, but backwards. And of course, you could actually do something much more exciting in this case. Now, what we actually want to do here is replace the content in this file with our newly modified result. And if I was to come over here and do replace, we can see that the view.replace method, let me move that up to make sure that it's above my big fat head in the window. The view replace method takes an edit that represents how we're going to be able to edit this thing. More on that in just a second. The region of the change that's going to be modified and the text to actually be inserted in there. So let's go ahead and do that. This is a view, so we want self.view because we're going to put it inside of this particular file, and we want to replace. Now this first argument is an edit. This very specifically is just a magic object, if you will, that Sublime provides to you. You have to give it to any of the API commands that directly modifies the content of a buffer. And essentially what's happening is I'm coughing into my hand and then saying that behind the scenes, anytime a bunch of edits in one sequence of commands happen, they get bundled together using this edit object so that Sublime knows these are all changes that happened as a part of one key press or something like that. And that's how this this undo system is done. So it's basically associating the edits you're making in the file with undo entries in the buffer there. And that's why if you were to make multiple edits inside of one text command, the undo will undo all of them all at once. If you want to make 3 changes and have them separately undoable, then you need to do that as 3 separate instances of a text command being executed. And this thing sort of snowballs on you, because if we were to use something like view self.view.run command insert inside of this, then we're executing another command that's also modifying the buffer, but because it's still technically part of this command, because our command doesn't finish until it falls off the bottom of run, then all of the edits made by that run command and any commands that it runs and so on down the line will also be bundled up into that one undo thing. And because of that edit grouping, only you need an edit object to be able to modify the buffer so that the undo system knows how to track changes, and only text commands can receive and edit, and text commands are the only way for you to get one of these things, which is technically a lie, because if you know what you're doing, you can create one of these things, but the world will fall down around your head if you do, so, don't. So here we are, we're going to replace the content of the current file. Now again, we need to provide, as we can see here, the region, the content of this file that we want to modify. And that's easy. It's this, the exact thing, the exact region that specified the text that we pulled out. That's the region we want to replace, because we want to replace the entire contents of this file with something else. And then we need the content of this particular file. And for that, I think we could say we want a new line, and we want to join the result array, like so. So we take that array of strings and join them back together into one big string so we can call this thing. And now that I saved that, assuming this is all correct, when I push the key, the entire content of the buffer should reverse itself in place. And the syntax highlighting gets more than a little unhappy about it, but in fact, that is indeed what is happening there. And I'm gonna undo that particular operation. So if you wanted to replace update a content of a file directly in place, this is a way to do that. And of course, you could dial in these replacement regions as well. Now, something else that was asked by Slalom last week, or some number of days ago that wasn't today, was something like this, but instead of replacing the current file, making a new tab in the current window and putting the content in there instead. And here's how you would do that. You need a window, and you need to say new file, because we want to be able to create a new file in this thing. Here we can see window.new file is going to create a new file, and the returned view will be empty. Now in specific, this is going to create a new file, which is really a new view, and it's going to create it in a window, because all views have to exist in a window. Pardon me. And there are a few ways to get a window. You could say sublime.active window, like so. Now, no matter where you run this particular bit of code, whatever window is currently the active one, even if there's more than one, will be the one that is returned. If your current command is a window command, a Sublime plugin.window command instead of a text command, then you could say self.window, because in the same way a text command is associated with a file and has a self.view, a window command has a self.window, which represents the window that it's currently running inside of. And because every file appears in a window, if you have a file, you can ask it what window it's currently in, and this is a method, it's not a property, so put the brackets around at the end there to make sure you're calling it. Now that we have the window that the current file is in, we can ask it to create a new file, like so, and this is going to return a view, if you will. I'm going to call it, we'll call it view here. You could also call it something like, say, new file, just so that you don't mistake it for self.view, because remember, self.view is the source tab, the thing we're getting the source that we're going to modify from. New file is where it's going. And now that we have this new file type thing here, we can inject our content into it. We're going to comment out that, but I will steal this thing. Now, if you want to inject data into a file like that, remember we said if you want to modify the content of a file, you have to have an edit object for that particular operation, and the only thing that gets one of those is a text command. Now, technically, we're a text command and we have an edit, but this edit is associated with the file that this command is running in, which is, if I push the key right now, this file right here. So we can't use that edit. We can't do something like self.view.replace or self.view.insert or something like that in this returned view because that edit doesn't associate with it. Best case scenario, nothing happens. Worst case scenario, the fabric of the space-time continuum folds in on itself. That probably won't happen. So what we actually need to do is run a command. And as it turns out, there's a command called insert that does that, and append does it as well. And we're going to say we want the new file to run a command named append. That command takes an argument with the characters that should be inserted, and that is the contents of our results joined back together in new line. Now, what's the difference, technically speaking, between append and insert? The difference between these two things, besides the fact that if you just had a view in any particular situation, for example, if I was right here and I said view.run command insert, then the text would be inserted at wherever the selection is. Or if there's more than one selection, it'll be inserted into all of them. When you use append, it's always stuck to the end of the buffer, no matter what selections actually happen to exist in there. And the other thing to note is if I did, let's do something like this. We're going to say we want to insert into the current view, which is my plugin right now. And this command also takes characters. And if we said 1 and let's say, what do we want to put in here? We want to put 4 spaces and say 1, and then a new line, and then 2. And if I execute this, we end up with 1 and then 2. Now note the text that I inserted in here is 4 spaces and the word 1, which is this one, then a new line, which should put the cursor to the left, but it is picking up on the indent in this thing, right? So the second word, even though there's no spaces in between the new line and the 2, gets that indent in there. If we instead did the same thing and used the append command here, when we hit the thing, we end up with exactly the text that we wanted to insert. 4 characters, 1, the new line, and then the 2. So all else being equal in this case, because we have a brand new file and we don't know what the content of this file is, you want to make sure that you use append in this case to make sure that it doesn't do weird auto-indenty things for you. I'm going to go ahead and hit the key now, and here we end up with a new file that has the reversed content of this. So whereas this line replaced the content of the current view, now we're creating a different one instead. I'm going to go ahead and do that. Now what we could also even do here if we really wanted to get fancy is we could say Sublime dot run command cannot type, and the command we want is new window, like so. Now once we do that, we'll end up with a new window. In fact, we can even do that down here to make sure that it's going to work. And there is a new window that has been created. I'm going to go ahead and close that. Now, this isn't going to return a value because run command doesn't return a value. It asks Sublime to run a command. So here's where you would say window equals sublime.active window, because once a window is activated or created, it becomes active. And if that was the case, then we could say instead of this, we could say window.new file. And now we're going to put the content of this thing into the new window that we created in here. And of course, in this case, you don't have to create a variable named window, we could just say sublime.activeWindow.new file if we wanted to do this. But if you wanted to continue using that window, that is how you would pull something like that off. We're going to back all of that out like so. And we're also going to do that instead. So we're back to the idea that if we do this, we're going to modify the content of this original thing. And instead, what if instead of reversing this, we actually did some sort of manipulation on this content instead? Because I think Slalom mentioned they're going to do some sort of regular expression find and replace. And if we wanted to do that, then we need to import the RE module in here so we get the regular expression module. That's a Python thing. And then we need to go back over to this browser window where we look for something like, I think it's re.sub. Oh, fine, we'll do this. re.sub, return the string obtained by replacing the leftmost non-overlapping occurrences of pattern. As a matter of fact, I'll even do this. Whoop. And this is the Python 3. So we're going to call this method right here. We're going to give it a pattern and a replacement and a string in the buffer, and it's going to return us back a modified version of that thing. I'm going to stick this back over here for the time being. So we could say something like here, like we're going to use re.sub, like so. That's going to do a substitution. The first thing we need to provide is the pattern, and let's say this is a regular expression that looks for, let's say, the text def plus any one or more white space, and then a capture of word characters like so. And then the next thing we're going to stick in here is the replacement. Let's say the replacement value is def and exactly one space and that like so. And we're going to replace it into the string line. And if we did that, and if I did a print out like so, if I hit the key, if I push the right key, you get some output spat out down here. And theoretically, nope, that did not work. Shoot. Regular expressions off the cuff. Oh, sorry. That was supposed to have that. My bad. I did say more than one white space, right? One of the things that surprised me initially was that window objects can run any command, but view only text commands and Sublime only application commands. Indeed. Another fun thing is that the window command, if you ask a window to run a command and it's a text command, it'll automatically figure out what has the focus and send the item there. So for example, if you wanted to open the command palette and then insert text into it, and you didn't want to just provide the correct argument, you could run the command to open the command palette and then run the command to insert into the currently active view, and it'll inject the text right in there. That's sort of a fun thing too. So you hardly ever need to use Sublime.run command. In the particular case of the new window thing, it's easier to do it that way than to say self.view.run command or self.view.window.run command, because I don't think it's a text command. That's probably not going to work. Okay, I'm going to clear my console here. So the idea now is we're going to still replace the content of this buffer with reverse text, but what we're going to dump out to the console is the result of checking for this regular expression and replacing it with this if it's found, which I think should be the exact content of this file, but with all of the methods named something instead, because this is just sort of a simple example. So let's see what happens when I actually do it. And there we go. Although it didn't quite work as we would expect it, because there should have been a plus there as well. And we can see it found the R in run and did that. So if I did it again, it would work. So what we're going to do now is take that out and take that out and say that we're gonna, let's just, for the purposes of this, do that and say out, like so. So now, what is this command doing? It's grabbing the entire content of the buffer as one big giant string, and then it's splitting it at new lines and processing it one line at a time, where it's applying this particular, if it finds this regular expression, it replaces it with this text coming from that line, and then append it, and then replaces the entire contents of this file with that particular output. So when I hit the key, we're irritated by the way the indent or the view position changes, but the methods are both named something, but otherwise this is all done. And I leave it to you to come up with something more exciting than one singular regular expression. There's probably a bunch of those things that you might want to do something with in there. Another thing you could do in this particular case, this is more of an advanced idea. Whoops. Is to use view.findAll, because you can provide this thing a regular expression, and then it will tell you all of the places where that regular expression exists, right? So let's go ahead and do this. We're going to comment out all of this for right now, so we can just still leave that in there. That file's probably broken now. If, let's say, we wanted to do something like what we just did, we have one regular expression, we want to find all of the places where this is going to be doing something. And we could say self.view, because we want to do something in our particular view, the one that the command is being invoked in, and we want to find all this content. Excuse me, let me have a little sip of coffee here. Fool myself with the locking mechanism. As we can see there, find all, the first thing it wants is a regular expression. That is the word def, then one or more white space, and then let's even do this more correctly. We'd say we'd gather, there's more than one or more white space between the def and the name of the thing, and then there is one or more word characters, in this case representing the name of an actual method. And technically, that's all we need to provide to this thing. We could provide flags to say Sublime Literal. If we wanted to search for a non-regex, which we don't, we could say ignore case if we didn't want this to be case sensitive, but we kind of do. And you can OR those both together. And this is going to return, as we can see here, a list of regions. So we're going to have to say that and print results. And now when I hit the key, I cough and wonder what I did wrong in this particular case. Because this really seems like it should work. Let's go ahead and take that out for the time being. Did that cause something to be wrong? That's weird. I'm also kind of confused about it finding, it's finding 3 of them because it's probably also finding that one maybe? This is one of those interesting things. So why does this work but this doesn't? Is there a reason why that would be the case? Oh, now you're going to work, are you? All right. Well, thanks. Yeah, that makes me feel better. Now we have a list of all of the places where this happens, right? We could actually do something like for region in this. Now we have the actual region. We could say self.view.subster and the region instead of that. And now we get to see, oh, why is there still a something in here? Oh, that one. All right. Rock on. That totally makes sense. Excuse me. Now we're finding all of the things. Now, of course, you'd want to dial your regular expression in to not be so dense. Now that we have this actual region here, we can do a bit more stuff with this thing. And what we're going to do in this case is go back to what we were doing before. So we would say results is equal to this, so that we could grab this like so. So it's going to go, this is back to, it's going to find all the places where this regular expression matches and return us the regions. Those ones right there. Now, we need to pass some optional flags. We're going to skip that out, and we're going to say format equals, this is this bit right here. If a format string is provided, then all matches will be formatted with the format string and placed into the extractions list. So the thing that we did last time was replace the name of the method with something, right? And for our purposes here, maybe I will just temporarily remove all of that stuff. So what we're actually going to format here is to say we want this to be def and then the content of the first capture and then something. And we need an extractions list. So we'll say extractions is equal to a list like this. And it's probably easier to specify 0 for flags so that we can pass that as the format argument and extractions as that. And that's a little bit long, but there we go. Now, if I was to print results and print extractions like this, then when we run it, I know why that was doing that last time. Okay. There we go. This is something that happened, in the Simple Notes plugin thing, and is a sort of a consequence of that thing I just, mentioned. This input in the where's my mouse? This area right here is a view, so it has text commands associated with it. If this has the input focus like it does right now, when you push the key, this regular expression isn't found because I haven't typed any Python into this input widget. Got to make sure the cursor's in the file you intended to do something with. We can see the 2 places where it was found, and we can also see it inserting. Although, I don't think that is the appropriate way to do that. Oh, sorry. Should have looked like that. There we go. Knew that didn't look quite right. So now it's finding the regions and it's doing that, right? So remember previously we've took the entire content of the buffer and got it as one big string, split it into lines, and then on a line-by-line basis, we said, hey, does this regex match? If it does, perform a replacement. And then at the end, you have to take every line in the file and stick them all back together into one big string and replace the entire content all as one big string. But you can see here, I'm just going to zoom that panel for a second. This is allowing us to find the places where this regular expression matches, and it's also allowing us to perform the replacement all at once. So we could iterate over this bad boy, and this requires me to remember how enumerate works, because I always forget. Let's say A, B in enumerate results, print A, B. Okay, I'm going to comment that out. Because, we'll comment that out, I said. We'll save it, and then we'll run it. The first thing is the index. The second thing is the thing. Okay, so I always forget which way that works. Index and region in results. And now we can say self.view.replace. We provided the edit. We provided the region that we want to replace, which is that one right there. And we can give it the extractions at this index, like this. We'll go ahead and remove all of that bit. And now when we run the command, it's modified in place. Although I'm kind of confused about that is enabled thing. I would imagine the underscore may or may not appear in the thing that, oh, also, why is it Why is it finding so much there? It's finding all of this business too. That doesn't seem quite right, does it? Shouldn't it not start from there and go to there? You know, as examples go, that could have been slightly more seamless, don't you know? This is an example of how if you did something like, oh, yeah, that's the first one and that's the second one, right? Why am I even capturing the second one? Well, I assume you'd want to actually do something with what you captured. Yeah, okay. Start of a line and some some amount of white space. We'll even say there doesn't even necessarily have to be any. And then we want to say /1. Oops, don't do that. /1 def 2. Okay. Well, let's just leave that the way it is. Floop. Now again, I'm kind of confused about why that that does not quite seem like it should be doing that, to be perfectly honest. Another thing we could do just temporarily is one of those nice debugging things, self.view.add regions test and results and a scope of comment. Print it to, oh shoot, haha, take it back. I saved that too soon. Comment that, you go bum 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 bum. I've got to put it back to the part where the methods actually are correct, like so. And then put that line in and comment that part out. Okay. Those are the parts that are being found with this regular expression. I think the issue there, such as it is new lines are white space. That's part of the reason why that's going all doolally, which might also be why that replace isn't quite going the way we want it to. So I think we probably need something like, how do you find, let's say, spaces and tabs? How about that? Specifically, not new lines. That makes that area be found the way one might expect. Now, if we also did SOMETHING, see if it works better now that if we do that, and we'll comment that out and go, thump. Whoa. Oh. Oh. All right. Ridiculous. Ridiculous bonehead moment. I know exactly why this is happening. Let's put it back the way that it should be. This is happening because we're replacing these regions. Oh man, that is in the realm of that whole idea of live streams showing you the things that get cut out of more prepared videos, making you think that some people are foolproof or know tons of stuff and never make mistakes specifically. Not the case at all. And this is a good example of that. And you may already have grokked what actually is happening here. But if I comment this bit out and print this, I'm going to print results again like this. Okay, and I'm going to run it, open the console. We see two regions in here. Now, what are regions? They are specifications of some span of text in the buffer. So the first one says it starts at position 104 and goes to 115, and that represents this one right here. If you counted all the characters up to there, it would be 104, and there's that many characters, it's 115. And similarly, this one starts at 393 and goes to 411, right? These regions are now stored in this list that we're about to iterate. And the first thing we do is replace the first one, this, with this text, which has the same white space and then the word def, and then the same white space. And then this one has the text run, but this one has the text something. Adding, just to answer your question, Ashwin, add regions will add a tiny dot to the gutter, but you have to use a particular, we did this, you need to specify the icon argument and specify a dot as the icon if you want that to happen. Otherwise, that doesn't happen. It doesn't have to be dot. It could be any icon you provide, and there's a few of them that are specified. Dot, circle, and bookmark and cross. Although I think as we discovered, cross doesn't actually exist. I think only dot, circle, and bookmark do. Or circle is missing and dot is there. I can't quite remember, but you know. That's sort of a twofer there. You can have the dot but not a region, or a region but not a dot, or both, and the region can be filled or underlined or outlined or hidden, in which case it's still there, but you can't see it. It can appear on the mini map or not if you want it to, and so forth. You can strike through text that way as well. But remember, okay, I'm going back to this. If you subtract 115 from 104, that tells you how many characters this spans. But we're replacing it with more because something has more characters than run. R-U-N. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. This has 6 characters more than run. That means that this character, this bracket, which used to be one bigger than this, 116, isn't 116 anymore. It's bigger because we put more text in there. More importantly, that means that if there's more text here, the start of this region starts later than 393. So what you actually need to do if you're going to do this is enumerate backwards through the list instead of forwards through the list so that you replace from the bottom up. And that way, if you change the length of this region, it doesn't matter because all the other regions you're about to do something with happen before it in the file. So the pre-calculated positions aren't modified. Pardon that. We're going to go ahead and do that now. For our purposes here, instead of replacing, let's print index and region and extractions index, like so. So we could actually verify when we run this that it's actually doing what we think it should be doing. It's replacing exactly the right stuff, but it's just sort of happening in a different position because we're of that thing. Now, if we said we wanted to reverse this thing, so we go backwards over, whoops, if we did it this way, now those are going from the bottom up. So we're getting, instead of the first one and then the second one, we're getting the second one, then the first one. But we need these indexes to be the opposite too. How do we work that out? Land region -1. Nope. Land results. Hmm. 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 How about that? -1. It's probably a cooler way to do that. We should have another method in here so that we can verify that it definitely does something. Whoa. Zero, 1, 2, 0, 1, 2. Cool. So take the length of the number of results that we found, subtract the current index from it, and then take away 1 because indexes start at 1 instead of 0. And if that was the case, then we could replace the region with extractions of this instead. Comment out that, and now when I hit the key, all the methods change. There we go. So this is another way you could do that. Took a little bit longer to get there because Captain Forgetful Pants forgot the cardinal rule of enumerating over regions. If you collected a set of one or more regions and you're going to use them to modify the content of the buffer, and what you're putting into the region is a different length, then either enumerate it backwards from the bottom up instead of the top down, because these results are always going to be top down no matter what, so that when you change the length of this text, all of the following regions, if any, have already been processed, or do it from the top down, but for every one, you need to know how big the region was to start with and how big the expanded text version was. It's going to be either a difference of 0 if they're the same length, or a bigger number if the text got longer, or a shorter number if the text got shorter. Keep a running tally of that. And then when you get to the second item, you need to adjust the region that you're modifying by that value that you started with to move it to where it will be now that you've modified the text above it. And then you need to keep rolling that forward. I tend to favor the going backwards over the file approach for something like this. Now, this particular method is not the greatest method if you have more than one thing that you want to search for, theoretically. If you're going to have like 10 or 20 regular expressions, maybe it makes more sense to grab all of the content, and then you can apply those 10 regular expressions one after the other to each line in the buffer, rather than having Sublime scan the entire file to find matches and then scan the entire file again to find matches, and so on. Or maybe that's a case of a premature optimization. It all depends on your own particular use case. Should always make something work. Should always make something work before you make it pretty and before you make it fast. I'm just gonna quickly here view.erase regions. Thank you. And just as a visual on what the question that Ashwin asked there about regions adding tiny dots to the gutter, if we did self.view.add regions, we get provided a region key. It's like a dictionary type thing. There can be any number of any number of sets of regions associated with something in any particular file. So crap. There we go. You should always, this allows you to figure out which set of things are which. For example, if you use the bookmark functionality that's built into Sublime, it's using add regions to store bookmarks and navigate between them. The next thing we need to provide is the regions. That's the results. Then we need to provide the scope, the thing that's going to color this. I'm going to use storage so that they're red. Or we could even say region.reddish if we wanted something like that. And now if I hit the key, we end up with that sort of thing happening. Excuse me. I need to do that. I did that thing again where I need to take this back to the part before I messed with it. Oh, sorry. Take it forward. But comment out that so it doesn't modify the buffer. So that's it doing that. We can say icon equals dot. And then you also get that dot in the area there. Is there some way to protect the region from modification by other commands before replacing? What exactly do you mean by protecting the region? In some theoretical sense, regions are safe in as much as you'd have to guess what someone else's region key is. So that's something that you could do there. Cross. Cross is the icon that's represented in the document. Cross is recommended, is mentioned as a thing that does not actually work. This is an example of if you use the bookmark command, it's doing something like that. And we can also do circle here as well. Incidentally, the icon takes the same color as whatever outline that you're displaying here. So if you wanted to have the dot be a separate color, then the first thing you need to do is that, and then you need to do the same thing again, but you might use a test2 and say region dot greenish and icon equals dot. But you also have to say flags equals sublime dot draw empty, like so. So now we're going to add one set of regions with the key of test that is red, that's this bit, and then it's going to use the exact same regions to apply the color green to a dot. Those regions won't be displayed there because we have the flag for empty, and then you end up with a different colored dot than you get there. And similarly, if you want some of these regions to have a different icon, you need to do the same sort of thing. You can have as many of these region things as you like. Man. And apologies for coughing there. I'm actually doing better than I would have thought. Something else to note about regions is now that it's in there, if you modify the inside of this thing, the region will expand because it knows what positions it was originally anchored at. Similarly, modifications before it, whoops, will modify them as well. Where you run into problems is if you modify text right at the beginning, it works, but if you modify text on the end, it doesn't. Your regular expression finds all of the def, but if there was some kind of listener that modifies def before replace, then the replace fails. What sort of listener would be doing something like that? I guess technically speaking, there's kind of a protection there because there can only be one command running at a time. So while my command is running, then this sort of stuff can't happen. I think events trigger after commands are done. Even an asynchronous modification event won't trigger while this command is still making modifications or finding. So I think that's sort of a non-issue if I had to guess. There's not a way for something else to modify the content of the buffer out from under us. I think if you wanted to modify something in here, well, I suppose in theory, an external thread that happened to have a handle on the view could try to modify it. In that case, there's not a way to protect that sort of thing except to communicate with the thing that's modifying stuff out from under you, which is easy if you're the one that's easy if you're the one writing the thing, but less so if you're not. I'm going to cringe when I listen back to this thing later. What can I say? I don't like to put off too many live streams. This stuff is too much fun. I'm going to go ahead and remove that. So this is somewhere back. We kind of ran off the track probably of where that particular question originally came from Slalom, but I think we had a fair bit of information in there that's probably a little bit of help there. Oh yeah, no confusion, but my general level of confusion at any number of things. Ow, that's the cardinal sin. Let's see. It's about an hour. I think I could probably go for a little bit more. So this was that particular thing. I'm going to go ahead and we'll delete this particular plugin. And I betcha one of those weird things. Now that command actually went away. That's neat. I need to modify my key bindings too. What was I going to say? I don't know of any color scheme offhand that uses pop-up CSS. Let's look at the documentation. The color scheme documentation isn't in here yet, is it? Oh, it is. Cool. I forgot I did that. CSS is applied to many HTML content created via the pop-ups and phantoms functionality that is exposed through the API. Supported CSS properties are discussed in the CSS reference. Plugins that use mini HTML are encouraged to set a unique ID attribute on the body tag of generated HTML to allow color schemes to override default plugin styles. I'm not sure that I've ever seen anything actually do that, although I haven't looked at a lot of plugin code. CSS past the pop-ups, CSS past the phantoms, if not specified, uses pop-up CSS. So first thing I suppose we want is, we'll just save that as, I'll say CSS thing. I'm all about the names. That makes sense. And we'll just leave that, well, sub CSS command. And then swap this to sub CSS. So that is doing what we want, as much as we want anything to happen. Now let's say we wanted to say self.view.show pop-up. And we're going to need to very quickly pop into the help for show pop-up. Content, flags, location. So let's see. The content is the text, hello world, like so. That seems good. Do we need any flags? Sublime dot hide on mouse move away causes the pop-up to hide when the mouse is moved unless it's moved towards the pop-up or when clicked or scrolled. They're not currently override audit pop-ups are not currently customizable. No, I don't think. I never think of this thing when I do that sort of stuff. That's actually the first pop-up thing that I have actually done. I was sort of waiting to bump the version of Sublime to a point where I knew that hover pop-ups were going to be available, because in Override Audit version 1, the minimum version was something ridiculous. Just the minimum version of Sublime Text was enough that I could use Sublime Syntax, but otherwise anything was game. So I didn't want to do too much with other features because it gets a little tricky to try to know if a thing exists or not. The look of the pop-up specifically is not customizable, I don't think, but the pop-ups are sort of a work in progress at the current time. I wanted to actually get it out there and use it for a bit more time before I decided what all needs to happen in there. I may or may not actually have a, well, since we we have an ability to look at stuff. Maybe I did put a thing in there. That's the help. I put classes, but I don't think I put Oh, there you go. Yes, I followed the documentation and then forgot about it. This body ID has a specific thing. So yeah, if you wanted to, you could totally fiddle with the settings on this thing at, some level, requiring you to modify CSS, I suppose. This is the only pop-up I have currently, though. Yeesh. Location is -1. Okay, so with this, we end up with that. Wherever the caret is, or wherever the mouse is, wherever the caret is, that is where the pop-up happens when we hit this. And I'm not using any sort of CSS in this at all, so we just get that. We're not even providing a max width or a max height, so we don't even get a nice little, potentially scrolly box. We don't have any links. We don't care when it hides. We just have that. Now, if I did user Monakai, I believe it's a global for pop-up CSS. Now's the part where I need to know something about, pop-up or CSS in general. I wonder if I need to wrap this in a body tag just to make sure that this does something. Let's do that. I'll even say ID equals test because, hey, but we'll swap this and this out for something else. That all still does the same thing here. We'll even do that so we can see what's going on there. Okay, so we got that going on. Now we need some sort of CSS rule in here, right? So we might say in the body, the color is red. So I think that means that the text colors should switch from white to red now that I've done this. And the background color changed too. Oh, that's neat. So that's definitely doing a thing. That's nice. If we wanted this to be more than one thing, then we probably want, like, say, a new line in here, and then a couple of spaces, color red, semicolon, new line, a couple of spaces, background green, because, why not? /n and that. No, huh? I never said I was good at CSS. Looks like we might need some margins too. 0/n, and then we want space padding, say 1M. What does that do? Bloop. Oh, look how unreadable that is. So the gist of this little bit here is this pop-up CSS is CSS. This isn't a particularly good example because there could be something that requires quotes in here, although I don't know enough CSS to know off the top of my head something. But if you want to, because this is CSS in a JSON string, there could be any number of weird machinations that you have to do in here. And fortunately, package dev syntax highlights this as CSS. Although, ooh, boy, that's ugly as all get out, isn't it? So if I'd have thought of that, I wouldn't have had to make the command. Oh well. That's sort of, less cringeworthy. Yeah, that's better. Way better. Cool. But what if, and this was one of those things that was mentioned in, as I mentioned at the beginning of the stream, the Discord, we were talking about a plugin that could take the content of this string and open it up in a tab, format it so it looks like a normal file, and then let you modify it. And then whenever you save, it would come back to here and modify this in line, which is sort of an interesting idea. I'm not entirely sure how well that might work, but we can see. If we wanted to, okay, expand selection to scope, Control Shift Space. Control Shift Space. And then again, and then again. So what we need is some way to select. Well, I guess we could just select the text and then work on the selection, right? Let's say that's the thing we want to do. We want to create a command where when you press the key, excuse me, not that, it will take the text that you've selected, open it up into a temporary view as CSS. Remember this particular region in this file, and every time you save in the other file, it'll zoop over to this one. Now, because this hover pop-up or this pop-up is going to follow that style, we don't necessarily need this bit in here. And technically speaking, this doesn't need to be a text command because it's not going to modify, this particular command isn't going to modify the buffer. We could make it a window command, but we do still want to associate this with a particular file. So here's what we're going to say. We're going to say is enabled. And we want our command to only be enabled if self.view.cell. Is that a thing? I believe it is. Right. We only want our command to be enabled if there's one selection and shoot, I forget how regions work. I'm trying to think ahead. Do they just have a region.size? I think it might be able to do that. Right? Cool. Len S0 is greater than 0. We only want our command to be active when there is exactly one selection and it is non-empty. This is something that you could impose in the key binding. One of those things I like to do is if I know my command is only going to run in certain specific cases, I like to also force it to disable itself outside of those cases because I will forget and I will have horrible problems. So not doing anything, doing something. That part works. Now we're going to say every time we do this, we need to open a temporary view that has that content. We're going to assume what we're actually doing something with here is CSS for our purposes and that it's all JSON encoded. So we need to grab the content of the selection. We know how to do that. That is self.view.subster of self.view.cell 0, like so. And we probably want to, let's say, we'll do it down here. That. And then we're going to print data. And the idea here is that string is going to be JSON data, so let's decode it down into a string. I'm not 100% sure this is actually going to do what I think, so let's see. Right. That's not cool. I wonder if it needs to have no, that's not going to work. I might be overthinking this, to be perfectly honest. Well, for our purposes here, It's technically just sort of a standard string, right? If we took that part, whoops, you got to have a selection. You got to have a select. Oh, I messed it up. You got to have a selection, hit the key. That is printing that literal string. Let's see. Oh, what's this? Python. Let's see. What do we want to do? We want to do something like expand character escapes. Process escape sequences in a string in Python. The correct thing to do is use the string escape code. What? Python 3. Turn it to a byte string in UTF-8 and then decode Unicode escape? Huh. Hands down the best solution, you say, even though this one says Unicode escape doesn't work in general. This is one of those scintillating things where I'm looking at, Stack Overflow over here. I don't do string I don't normally do string and text processing in Python myself. So this is one of those areas that is, escapes me. This is the real answer, you say. Are you sure? Codex.escape decode, you say. Not available in this version of Python. Possibly version in the new one. Come on, you. Hey, cool. How about if you actually, fixed overflow in the Unicode escape codec and the codex.escape decode. How come that's not actually found as a thing, man? That's weird. Fine. How about that? Oh, well, because of that, I suppose. Replace with backslash. Of all the things where I expected this plugin idea to sort of fall down, figuring out how to take a set of strings that sort of encoded as a JSON string, was not one of them. I really feel like the JSON module is going to do a thing, but it didn't seem to, but maybe I'm relying too much on something. I don't want to dump the thing. The problem, such as it is what we're getting back is a string. So I guess technically this might have done what I wanted if it looked like this, which was my original thought. Yeah. Always go with your gut instinct, or at least try it without assuming it's not going to work. Now, here we're saying that we're actually selecting that. So we have the actual data now. Whoops. Mhm. Now, if I do that, that'll not work. So, a more functional version of this would actually have to detect if the thing actually was wrapped in the string already and do something if not, right? Um, if data 0 is not equal to that, da, da, da. How about that? So if it was the version with the quotes, it works. And if it was the version without the quotes, it works. Now, all else being equal, if you've watched enough streams, you'll know that I tend to spend a lot of time on getting things that don't necessarily matter correct. I have a hard time writing what I perceive to be something that's inherently broken. So we have a command that only allows you to execute if the selection, there's exactly one non-empty selection in the file, and it's going to assume that what you give it is going to be a JSON string. So if it's already wrapped in quotes, that's what it will be handled as. Otherwise, it will add the quotes for you. Data ends up being that. Now we should actually have some sort of try except around this thing because Sublime decode value will throw an error if there is a problem decoding the thing. And Sublime decode value is the same as the JSON thing for decoding a thing, except that it's built into Sublime, so the JSON it supports trailing commas and comments, which standard JSON does provide. Now we're going to need to create a new window. We covered that earlier in the stream, or a new view, I should say. We're going to say the temp file is self.view.window.new file. And we specifically want to say the syntax equals, shoot. It's going to have to be the name of a thing. So let's say packages, css.sublime syntax is probably the thing. And then we're going to say temp.run command append with arguments of characters. And the characters to insert is the data. And technically that would probably be enough for us to know that this thing is actually working. So we hit that, hit this. Here's our CSS nicely splopped out into a file. The cursor's all up at the top. It is a weird scratchy type buffer though. So we are going to say temp.set scratch true. So when the buffer is created, it's a little temporary type thing. So instead of being untitled and marked as modified when we do it, now when we do it, it's gonna not be. So we can modify this with impunity. We probably also want to say temp.setName inline CSS. So instead of being named untitled when we do it, we get a nice tab name. Now here in this buffer here, the actual view where we're doing this, we want to say self.view.add regions source CSS, and the list of regions is going to be self.view.cell 0, which is going to cause us potential problems in a minute. Does decode value handle JSON files associated with Sublime? It's not used specifically as far as I know, but it uses the same built-in JSON parser that Sublime uses to parse its configuration files and stuff. Yes. So you could do like sublime.load resource packages user preferences.sublime settings, which gives you the entire content of the file, including any comments that you might have in it. That's probably a bad example because mine doesn't have one. This one, on the other hand, it does have comments, right? Now, if we were to import JSON, say, I don't know, how to even do this thing in JSON, to be perfectly honest. Load string. Looks like the thing. If I JSON.load load string this, it gets mad because there's something unfortunate in there, I think. Let's see if I'm actually correct here. But if we did sublime.decode value, we end up with the dictionary. The comments are missing, but that's okay. This is whether you use the JSON version or the Sublime version depends on if you want that extra functionality. But I think all the JSON loading that's done by Sublime itself is done in the core, so it's using the C++ version of whatever. I think it's a custom made library, but don't quote me on that. It's been a while since I've heard Will talk about it. You're going to Now what we're going to do here, the idea of this is we want to mark a region in the file that is the place where this CSS came from, so that we'll see something in here and we'll know that we did this, but also we can use this to try to figure out exactly where to put this text back later. And we're going to run into a problem because here we're using the selection, and if the first thing isn't that, we do this. So I think what we need is to say span is equal to self.view.cell0. That's the original span. Then we can pull the text out of that span and then say, if we don't have quotes, add them. Now, what we're planning on doing here is, if the string that you passed in, that the selection has the beginning and end quote, then that's exactly the region we want. If you did it so that you did the inside part, then we need to add these quotes when we do the thing. So we want to make sure that this region spans that as well. So we need to do that whole cover business, return a region spanning both this and the given regions. Right, so we're going to need to bump this thing the other way. So along with formatting the data, we're going to say span is equal to sublime.region span.a minus 1 and span.b plus 1, like so. And then we can say span as the single region that's going to be the source CSS. We want this to be, let's say, let's do that red again, flags equals sublime dot draw no fill. So we get an outline and the icon will be the circle. So with all of that, and that stuff is stuff that we sort of covered earlier here, if I quote the entire string, let's do it this way so we can see it, the entire string including the double quotes, I broke something, crap. Oh, sorry. Once you do that, you have to say icon equals. My bad. Let's go back and do that again. Okay. So we have the whole string here. We hit the key. Now we've got our inline CSS. I'm just going to close that real quick. And we can see the span or the region marks that entire thing. We guess get the little red dot in the gutter area there. So this is the CSS that is in our little view, although we totally closed that thing. And let's say view.erase regions source CSS, like so. Okay. Now, if I instead did it with the content inside, then that thing we just did should bump the region out one in the other direction. We still get that, and that is still working. And we could even see that the selection was different there. So perfect. Now, what else do we need to do in this thing? We've marked the actual source region here. We're going to say the temp.settings.set, and we're going to say source file is, hang on. Sub CSS source is wrong. Self.view.file name. Our command is only enabled if there's exactly one non-empty selection and the view has a file name associated for our test purposes here. So we mark the region in the buffer with that thing we just saw. We create a new view inside of the current window using the CSS syntax because we know we're editing CSS. We run the command append to append the data that we pulled in there. It's all nicely unJSONed, if you will. We set it to be Scratch so that the little modification buffer doesn't show up in there. We'll see if that kicks us in the butt in a second. We set the name of the thing so we know what it is. Now we're adding a setting of sub CSS source with the name of the file that was originally the source of the CSS, so that when we hit save in our little sample buffer, we can excuse me, know what file it is that we need to actually modify. That will also serve as the setting that lets us know that this is a thing. We'll even say temp.settings.set sub CSS tab true, like so. So we have a setting that lets us know that this is a sub CSS tab, and we have a key that tells us what file we're currently associated with, so that when we get a save happening, we know where we can go back and shoot the data in. And then that is technically all we need for that part, I think, for now. So I'm going to go ahead and close that. Now, what we might also do here, now that I think of it, and I need to get regions. Return the regions associated with the given key, if any. If I said view.getRegions does not compute, we end up with an empty list. So let's say has region equals self.view.find regions. That's the thing I just said, right? No, I said get regions. And the regions that we're saving is source CSS. So now our command is only enabled when, let's actually say when there is exactly one selection and that selection is not empty, and this view has a file name, which is so that we can find it later, and len has region equals 0. Oh, and let's actually say not has region, let's say, and close that. And we can say, actually, we can probably just do this. Because what we want, and I'm going to go ahead and say print thing, like so. now that we have one of these in the buffer, if we selected other text and hit it, we don't want it to work. We only want to have one of these in a buffer at any given time, just to keep life simple in our little prototype here. Excuse me. Which kind of hoses us here because I closed that thing. So let's go ahead and do that. Now, we're going to need a couple of things in here. The first is sub CSS listener, which we're going to say is a view event listener. And we're going to say is applicable and settings return settings dot get sub CSS tab. So this listener is only active in the view that is that little sub CSS view thing, and class overall CSS listener. And this is one of those things where maybe these both need to be one. Maybe I don't even need that view event listener once we get to the end of this thing. We'll see what happens. And here we want to on pre-close. It's going to be self and view. If I had to guess. Yeah, let's go ahead and do, yeah, on pre-close. That one has one too. Okay, this possibly could be something that rolls together. Who knows? Called when a view is about to be closed. This is important because the view is still in the window. You can't stop the close from happening. On close is called when a view is closed. There may still be views in the buffer, but this or other views into the same buffer. However, on close, the view is no longer in the window, which means view.window returns none. And on pre-close, view.window returns the window because it hasn't actually closed yet. Here's what we want to say. In the overall CSS listener, which actually, now that I think about it, is probably going to cause us problems. Maybe we'll do this all in one. We'll just see what happens. If view, oh, actually, let's do this thing. We need this line again. We want to say source is equal to this. And if, excuse me, if there is a source CSS region in here, then we need to find subview equals find view, find CSS view, let's say. I believe that is a thing. Attempts to close the current view, possibly prompting the user. So here's what we're going to do here. And we're going to say, first of all, this view is about to close. Ask it if it has a source CSS region. If the answer is yes, we need to do a thing like so. We're going to, for this purpose, assume, actually, yeah, we're going to do, actually, view.file name. No, actually, we'll just do view. We'll do this. The idea here is if we decided we were closing this Monokai.Sublime color scheme thing while we have one of these sub-regions open, then we want to close that other tab because otherwise when you do something in it, it won't be able to find the source of this thing, right? So we have a method that's going to find the CSS view that's associated with this thing, and if we find it, ask it to close. Now we're going to need to implement this method. We'll do that up here. And we say for window in sublime.windows for view in window.views. If viewed name is equal to inline CSS, then we want to do something in here. And what we actually want to do is say if source view dot file name equals view dot settings dot get of sub CSS source return view. Now this is rough and ready code here, of course, but the general idea is look through every window, look through every view in every window, look for a view whose name is inline CSS. If we find one, if the file name associated with the file we passed in, which is the file that's closing, is the same as the source of the file that's about to be closed, then return that view. So, in theory, if I was to do this, we have our little inline CSS. If I close this, that tab should close too. But it doesn't. Oh, because I made a boo-boo. What did I? I used self.view, didn't I? Too used to doing that stuff. Reopen that file. Okay, let's try that again. We got to close that one now. Now, one more time. We do that. We come here. We decide we don't want this file open. We close it. That tab also goes away. Beauty. Okay, let's reopen that file, though. We also need to do the other thing as well. Could go wrong if one line selection is not a pop-up CSS thing. Yeah, there's a lot more stuff that has to go into a production version of this. I would imagine that it would be less, you have to select it specifically, and more like in this case, we could have a context menu knowing that the text under the cursor is this thing. Or there could just be a command that where you say, I want to edit the pop-up CSS of my color scheme, and it would, do the right thing, if you will. But if you were following the discussion in the Discord where Faceless User and I were talking about this, this is that whole thing between a thing is technically easy to do and technically hard to do well, if you will. But it could be the idea for a package. My brain automatically spins to the idea that it doesn't necessarily have to be CSS. Could be anything. um, Now, we want to do the same thing in reverse. If we were to close that inline CSS view, we want to come back to this file and clear that region from it because it's no longer the active thing there. So I think what we need to do for that would be, how do we know that view.settings.get? We'll say this, view sources, view settings, get sub CSS source, right? And if there actually is such a thing, then we can do something in here. Now, do we want to inline this? Main view equals find source view, let's say, of view. And if main view is not none, then main view dot erase regions. Is that the thing? I remain amazed that I remember half of the things that I do. The regions that we stashed in there was source CSS. Now all we got to do is implement find source view. Where'd my mouse cursor go? There we go. We want this. Find source view, and we'll say subview. And then we do something very similar to this. And again, this is one of those things where instead of being two methods, this could be one method with an argument that tells it which way it's supposed to go, right? For every window, for every view and every window, if view dot file name is not none, then go in here. If, oh, actually, let's pull it out once. Source name equals subview, whoops, dot settings dot get and sub CSS source. Ask the subview that we got what its file name is. Look through every window, look for every view and every window. If this view has a file name, if the view's file name, this is view.filename is equal to, well, I guess I could have just inlined that, couldn't I, if I was going to do it that way. This would be subview. And we don't need that part at all. I don't tend to like to do that sort of thing, but you know. So let's see what happens now. We grab this, we do that. Now that region is in that file. Even if we don't select it, we can see that's the case. And if I was to close this tab, that region goes away. So that little bit of stuff is happening nicely. I'm going to say we don't necessarily need the sub CSS listener. I was thinking that there's a thing that we want to do in here, but I don't even know that we need to actually do that. So let's get rid of this. We're gonna need, though, another command. So let's say class update CSS source command. That's going to be a text command because we're going to want to fiddle a thing, run, whoops, jerk, and edit. Okay. We only want this command to execute if we do that. Now, here's the part where we say source view is equal to that thing that we just wrote here, which is find source view. Find source view of self.view. So when this command executes, look through all of the windows to find the tab that has the file name that is associated with the inline CSS that we're currently editing. If we wanted to, we could also make sure that this command actually only is enabled if it can actually find the tab. Is this the one that's obfuscated or undocumented? And okay, use window. Okay. One of Sublime window status message and Sublime status message. Self.view.window.status message. Unable to find source file. Pretty sure that probably shouldn't be able to happen because if the source file was closed, that tab would be closed. But, you know, defensive programming being what it is, I make enough mistakes. Now, what we're actually, no, that's right. Yeah, we actually found the view that we wanted to fiddle something with. Now, here's that other thing that I mentioned previously. We want to modify the content of that file. But in order to do that, we're going to need a command. Let's see if this will work first. Updating CSS source. Because the idea here is we need a key binding up here for control plus S on that command we just made, update CSS source, like so. We actually want a context in here where the key is setting dot, I forget what I called the thing already, sub CSS tab. And equal and true. Fix that. So, in the world of the conceivably theoretical, once we do this and get our little tab, every time I save in this buffer, we run our own command instead of the save command, right? So perfect. That key binding is doing what we want. We'll go ahead and close that. Now, of course, this was a production thing. Then you need to provide a key binding for Windows, Mac OS, and Linux to make sure that'll work. And I specifically used a setting here with a Boolean value so that I could use that settings context. But if you didn't want to do that, your event listener could have an on-query context handler and you could define your own context in there as well. Now, the first thing that we need to do is from the current view is the place that this is where we're saving. We want to actually get the content of that buffer out, right? But we already know how to do that, which is self.view.subster sublime.region from 0 to the length of self.view. And encode value data to put it back into JSON. And we'll even print just to see if that's actually doing what we think. Looks like it is. I think that means it's also wrapping it in the double quotes there, which is why we wanted to make sure that that outer region spanned the quotes too, even if we didn't actually pick it that way. If we make modifications to this, we can always undo. Now, all we need to do is tell the source view to update itself. And to do that, we're going to say source view dot run command. Oh, we could actually possibly make this cooler, but I'm kind of hit my 2-hour limit on a proof of concept thing. So let's continue. Let's say do CSS replace, and we want the be data like so. Class do CSS replace command, which is a Sublime plugin text command, which has a run method that takes a self and an edit and a CSS, and then we say we got to get the regions, which is this line here. And we would make sure that this command only enables itself when it needs to, but we can actually make this, since this is an internal command, if you will. We don't necessarily have to do anything too fancy here. We could assume that no one's going to bind a key to this thing, or if they do, they deserve everything they get. We're going to find the list of regions, and then we're going to say self.view.replace using that edit, using the region that we just got, which is source 0. If len source is equal to 1 to this, and the text is CSS. Save that. Seems to be okay. So let's go ahead and let's do that thing where we say that I can't push the right keys. Watch this. We have, I'm going to close this. We have some thing here, and we want to actually modify the style of this because it's pretty terrible. Let's say we want the text color to actually be white instead. We select all that text, invoke the command. It split out this inline CSS thingy here with our CSS. It's got the CSS syntax highlighting. It's all formatted out. Come over to here. Now, if we were to actually check, we move the selection around. That whole area is marked out with the region to indicate that that's the place the CSS came from. There's even a little dot over here, just, cuz. Now, if we were to close this file, that one automatically closes, which is what we want, because if we close the file that we had that sub tab open and we don't want to be able to modify it anymore. Similarly, if we did that one more time, if we close, and we can see here, we got the region. If we close this, that region goes away, which is what we want, because if that tab is gone, nothing is laying a claim to this. And even if the selection was the text inside of the quotes, when we hit the key, that tab still opens up. And over here, we can see the selection is still what we selected, but the region is poking out on either side, and it has expanded it out. Now, if we change this to, say, white, and this to be dark blue, and if I even did something like, well, that's not what I meant to do. I pushed the wrong key. When I hit the save in this, that one should update to be color white and a background color dark blue. Let's see what happens. Well, that's unfortunate. Let's actually fix our command, shall we? What did we do wrong? Ba-ba-ba. Oh, because I copied and pasted. Copy and paste. It's going to get you every time. Okay. Let's try that again. We're going to go ahead and zoom that, but bring this one back up. Make sure we can actually even see that in here. All right. Here it goes. And this file has been updated. We might even say we don't want any of this stuff in here anymore. Although that does tend to break things a little bit. Why? I'm not sure. Oh, that region got shorter. Hang on. Something went a little doolally here. Did it do that after the first one? Let's do a little bit of testing on that, because I think something else I mentioned earlier in the stream is when you modify regions, sometimes things get a little weird. If we were to grab all of it, the region is spanning everything in there right now, which is exactly what we like. And then if we hit save in here, the text is exactly the same length, so everything's okay. If I change this to blue, and I save that, see that text changed to blue. This got bumped by 1 because the replacement text was 1 bigger than it used to be. So a little bit of work needs to be done on that. Let us close that and take this back to the way that it was. That also, we did a thing broken here too. Line 73. Oh, that's the old one. Okay, never mind. But how did we manage to close that in a way where that didn't trigger? Because didn't we already discover that that was in fact working? Maybe there's two problems here. Let's do that again. If, again, that thing is spanning the whole thing, what if this got, we did one longer and the left side moved over? What if it was instead of red? In that case, the start is okay and the end is okay. So if the new region is longer than the original region, then the left side needs to move left by as many things as it was different, if you will. So let's say region equals source. Oops. That's the region where we're actually going to do something with, and then say difference is equal to the length of the CSS minus the length of the region. And then we'll print that so that we can actually test this out. We close that, close that. So we hit the key. If we make it one longer, the size difference ends up being 1, which is exactly what one might expect. And let's go ahead and do that. Okay. If I save this without changing anything, then the size difference is 0, which is what one would expect. Undo. If I make it shorter, then the size difference is -1, and that's also okay. Undo. So we're going to do that. We don't need source 0 here. We can use region. If diff is greater than 0, then region equals sublime dot region dot a minus diff to go back however many it got longer, and whatever the b is, and then self.view.add regions, and the key is source CSS. We technically need to do exactly the thing we did originally, which is this. So let's just copy that and paste it right here. We've copied it and pasted it. That means it is 100% eligible for being a method of some sort. So we have that, we have this. We change this to be blue. It's getting longer. I save that. We broke it, did we? Oh, yeah, because the indent is all dumb. Okay. Save that. Oh, undo that. Try that again. Region. Copying and pasting. Never a good idea. Hitting here, pressing save. This has bumped out to be color blue. The region is now it's one too far. What the hell, man? That doesn't seem like what we want to have happen here. Let's undo that. What if it was too longer? 1, 2. So you're telling me that if I if I don't do this, if this was red and that looked like that, I hit save, nothing would happen. So you're saying, you're telling me that if I made this 2 characters longer and pressed save, the region moves to the right 2. But if I do that, it doesn't. Was the other end wrong too? It went 1, 2. Oh, it actually went 1 too far. It's 3 and not 2. And 1, 2 over on that end. Oh, yeah. I guess we got to modify both ends of this thing, don't we? Hmm. Something like that, I think. Okay, that went way too far in that direction, but that's okay. This is, I bet you, an exactly another one of those cases where the region changed position in the file slightly, perhaps. This is a little bit of a shotgunny thing. Normally, I'd be more thought-provoking about this, but the stream has gone on a little bit longer, and I want to have working a prototypey thing here. So we can close that. That seems to be okay. That is a perfect region. It's 2 longer than it used to be. When I press save, it is now exactly 1 long. Okay, so my little adjustment there was not strictly necessary. Okay. I kind of suspected that was going to be the case. So we got that. The region moves, the whole region moves along by the length of the size difference. Now that I think about it, I guess the math that I was doing to adjust the region to the left is based on the assumption that it looked to be wrong after it was done, but maybe this close to the adjustment, the region is still kind of right. Let's see. Okay, now you're just messing with me, man. Do I not need to do this part at all, and it's the other end that I need to do something with? Maybe that was my problem all along. That seems to be okay. Undo that. Okay, let's do this. Couldn't get more weird than this. Well, that's looking pretty good. Man, the color is going to be white. The background color is going to be cyan. The margin is going to be 20, and this is going to be 2. And color white, background color cyan, margin 20, padding 2. And, well, I mean, I guess I got to save the color scheme. Let's change that color to black. Now the problem is the pop-up isn't quite the right size, so I guess we probably don't want to have any margin on here. Well, all things told, that seems like it was a lot easier to modify the CSS doing it that way. Oh, as a proof of concept, that's kind of neat. Maybe we want to change the font size on this thing too. Yeah. I'm not even sure if that's the way you do that, to be perfectly honest. It is. All right, so cool, cool. I'm going to assume we don't want any padding on this thing either. That's probably part of the reason why that was being kind of weird. All things being equal, Yeah, there was some amount of padding, just not that much. Okay. We're really just sort of off in the weeds of, you know, playing with a thing we made. A little more than that. Oops. So as proof of concepts go, that's actually not too shabby. Had a few little problems in there, considering that I just sort of pondered in my head exactly how this thing might actually work. Eh. So there's a few things that could be changed about this. These two methods are doing almost exactly the same thing. They're only differing in what setting. They're actually not even checking that. They're doing technically the exact same thing, except that this one is doing it if the file name isn't none, and this one is doing it if the view name is inline CSS. So imagine there was just a find sub view that took a source view and then a Boolean argument to say which way you were going. This actual first test could do one of two things, and everything else is, exactly the same otherwise. That shortens that up real nice. This sub CSS command is pretty good for what it's currently looking for. We don't technically need an update CSS source command and do CSS replace command because we could imagine that this one command also takes something like CSS but sets the default to be none. And if the default for this is none, it would do what this one's doing here. But if CSS was not none, it would do this instead. And if that was the case, then in this thing, when we say source run command, we could just do update CSS source, but we're invoking it on a different view and we're passing the CSS argument. So the one command does the two things. Both of these two things don't need to be here. We have our overall CSS listener. That's pretty good. Now, as Ashwin pointed out in the chat on this thing, this will go way wrong if you decided to do it for something like this. I mean, I guess technically that's CSS. So that kind of works out. I'm going to close that. If it was something that wasn't valid CSS, there's that exception being thrown down here, which is the result of this decode value is throwing an exception to say this isn't valid JSON. So you'd have to test for that as well. There's also the usability issue, such as it is, of having to select this whole thing. And how you get around that, well, as I said, you could have this has a specific extension, so you could easily make a command that only is active in a Sublime color scheme file, and then when you right-click the context menu, you could have an edit pop-up CSS and an edit other CSS command, which would automatically find this region and invoke that command for you. You could add a command in the command palette that says edit pop-up CSS that would automatically open the current color scheme and then do that. Um, there's currently only allowed one of these things per file. So if you had pop-up CSS and phantom CSS, you have to close one to be able to edit the other. So having some other way to associate these regions, like for example, this sub CSS source could be sub CSS source underscore one and sub CSS source underscore two, and there could be more than one set of regions the same way. So you could have more than one of them and they would cross associate. The name of the tab should probably be pop-up CSS and not inline CSS, for example. Um, you could even try to generify it enough so that the syntax isn't explicitly set to packages CSS, css.sublime syntax as a command when you're doing the thing. There's a lot of things sort of at play here that could be done to turn this into something cool. Um, how you do that depends on what sort of thing you like, and how you actually want this stuff to all work. There may be some potential edge cases in this part. As we saw earlier in the stream, I managed to close that tab in a way where this region didn't go away. And maybe that was because of that weird bug in here. Once the on pre-close event handler fires, if this thing hasn't happened, then there's no way to get rid of it. So maybe you need a way to specify that in here. That was one of the things I speculated in the Discord. Um, you might want to decide that you could select a set of text and then right click and say, make this the destination of that source or something. That was sort of a different version of this command, if you will. But that is sort of what we got going going on there. So hopefully this stream wasn't too terrible with the coughing, and the lighting was sort of better, perhaps. I noticed while I was testing earlier that sometimes if I lean in more and lean back, the weird auto exposure thing would make the thing flash, but then after a bit I couldn't make it happen anymore. So I don't know if it got smart or what. But we have made it to the end of the stream. We answered some questions for slalom, perhaps. I'm going to provide the link. Maybe there's some information in there, something that could be pulled out for another video. And we even sort of came up with a proof of concept for a way to make editing inline CSS in a color scheme work a little bit better. And you could use this for any sort of file content that needs to be folded up into one. For example, Sublime completions files also require the text in the completion to be a single JSON string. If you wanted to inject more than one line, maybe you need extra handling to be able to do something like that as well. Who can say? So hopefully you found this interesting, and my semi-scratchy kind of coffee voice hasn't caused too much of an issue. But we are we have reached the end of the stream. So thank you so much for watching. Remember, if you are watching the replay of this, you can always join in on the stream, ask questions in the channel for plugin development or Sublime in general. Don't worry about disrupting the flow. The whole flow is about doing package development stuff and Sublime and learning about things. So questions are exactly where we are. And if you like more targeted videos, remember there's a link down in the description of this video to my other channel where we do videos every Monday of a tutorial Sublime Text nature. The most recent one was on the arithmetic command and how it's a little bit more powerful than you might think at first blush. So if you haven't seen that video, I would recommend it as well. But that's going to be the end of the stream here. We're going to go ahead and schedule next week's stream. I can't imagine my cold is going to get worse instead of better. So that is that. If you have any ideas for what the next stream should be, you can totally hit me on Twitter with those things, or a message on one of the many ways that you can get in contact with me. And if I had set up the key binding correctly in OBS, I could fire up a nice lower third, but I can't do that right now. But maybe this week I'll find the time for that. Until the next live stream or the next video on the other channel, this is live OdatNurd, aka Terrence, aka kind of croaky guy, telling you to have a sublime day.